Welcome to Happy Path Programming. I'm Bruce Eckel.
I'm James Ward. All right. Well, welcome everyone. And today we have with us Alina, who I know I've never actually met you in person, but I've seen you. Well, you think that we met in person at a conference in Ukraine, which is totally possible, right?
You just don't remember being in Ukraine.
Yeah, I think it is. Though I tried to Google that conference, along with your name, and I cannot find it. So maybe I am mistaken after all, and you are right. Yeah.
I think I have presented for Ukrainian-based conferences or events, but I don't think I've ever traveled there.
Okay, so, I might be wrong, but I will do my research offline.
Go, so. Maybe you've seen the future, and now I need to go there for a conference. So.
Yeah, it's really great in here, and we have such a huge and great developer community. So yeah, please come at some point. I'm sure you will love it here.
Yes. Okay, so we had you on to talk about a few things, but we have talked about GraalVM on a number of episodes, and you're one of the experts, developer advocates, right, for GraalVM. And so instead of continuing to talk on our podcast about something we know very little about, we've used it, but I think
you've used it.
Yeah, we wanted to learn about GraalVM. So, but tell us about yourself. What do you do? And yeah.
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm a developer advocate for GraalVM at Oracle Labs, right? Oracle Labs is this kind of R&D organization at Oracle. Originally, as I know, it used to be Sun Microsystem Labs, right? And back then, when Oracle acquired Sun, it became kind of Oracle Labs, right? And GraalVM is one of our projects. It has been a research project for quite a long time. And then something like 3 years ago, we rolled out our first kind of industry-ready, production-ready builds, right? And also that's about the time that I joined the team. So something like 3 years ago. And I'm doing developer advocacy in this team. And yeah, I'm based in Ukraine, in the beautiful city of Lviv. So that's about it about me.
Nice. Awesome. So give us like the 101 information on GraalVM for those that may not be familiar with it.
First of all, what problem is it solving?
That's a good question.
That's a good question, and it's not so easy to answer because GraalVM is a big, complex project, right? And it can answer to so many, developer needs and problems. But let me kind of start with the very beginning, right? So GraalVM is a high-performance virtual machine, and it can execute a number of languages and work in a number of environments. So I remember when I was about to join the team and I was doing kind of my research about the project, I really liked that kind of mission statement that the team had. And I think it was something like, we want to make every language out there fast, right? So they wanted to create a universal virtual machine, meaning that not only like one language or a narrow set of languages can be fast, but actually every language out there could be made fast with those ready-to-use solutions and the platform that GraalVM offers. And I thought that vision and that mission is pretty amazing, right? Because there are so many languages out there, and to some extent, they re-implement the same components or the same pieces of technology, right? And maybe that there could be a more efficient way to do it, or maybe even, smaller languages. So something just developed by a group of enthusiasts can also get access to this high-performance platform with considerably less effort than they would if they would implement it from the ground up, right? So I think it was a pretty great mission and vision for the project. And I think it is true at this time, right? So at the moment, we have so many languages that our core team developed on GraalVM, but also there are quite a few that the community developed. We have some of them listed on our GitHub repo, and I'm sure that there are way more languages that people just kind of develop out there and use GraalVM as a platform that we don't know of. But we do give them this kind of platform where they can develop those new languages.
So it's a virtual machine.
Yes.
But the experience of the end user is that it just is an executable, which includes everything, including the program. Is that right?
I think that's the native image part of it, which we'll get into.
Maybe I started from the more complex side of things because it was more exciting for me. But I was talking about language.
Our only experience with GraalVM has been through native image, and so there's a whole other side of GraalVM.
So but are we talking about like, what's the assembly language of this virtual machine? Is it just JVM? Is that's what it is? It's a JVM.
Let me maybe reiterate from the user perspective, right? Because I started talking about language implementers and maybe unnecessarily complicated things, right? So you don't necessarily have to implement your own language on GraalVM, right? You can just use what is there offered for you in the base download, right? And what there is one thing, you can run your Java programs as you would, let's say, on OpenJDK, right? So there is this whole ready-to-use JDK distribution that comes within GraalVM. That is one part, right? So GraalVM JIT, where we just replace the compiler and you use JDK as you would use any other JDK. So that's one piece of technology, right?
In that case, does it use truffle?
So not necessarily, right? You can just use Java straight, just based on those two levels, right? So you would have like OpenJDK or Oracle JDK as a platform and GraalVM as a compiler plugged into it. And you don't need necessarily truffle in that case. You can just execute Java with those two.
Okay.
You could, though, like, again, complicating things, you could, though, use truffle to execute Java as well, because now we also have a Java implementation based on truffle, right? So like one more, I think, third already way to execute Java on GraalVM. But that is not necessary, right? This is something you can do.
You can
but
choose.
Also, but also you can
in the case of Java, you can choose truffle or is that still hotspot in that case?
In case of Java, like basically you can use GraalVM JIT, the compiler, you can use native image, and you can use Java on truffle. So basically there are three ways of running Java on GraalVM, right? But just to kind of finish that thought, right? So what comes in GraalVM and what you can see and use as an end user. So GraalVM JIT, right? Execute Java as you normally do on any other JDK. Native image, where you would ahead of time compile Java into a platform-specific binary. There is truffle, right? So the language implementation framework, and you can use one of those languages such as JavaScript and Python and R, Ruby, and so on that we implemented as a team, or you can implement your own languages on GraalVM. And there are also like some tools and additional capabilities for you, but in a nutshell, those are the main components.
Cool. Would you tell us a little more about truffle? Because I mentioned it, but then realized I didn't say what truffle was.
Yeah. So truffle is our language implementation framework, right? This is the way we implement languages as a team, and this is the way community implements those community languages. And it allows you to fairly easily implement languages on the GraalVM platform. So in a way, what you do, you implement an interpreter for your language in Java, and then using truffle and using GraalVM as a compiler, you get kind of out of the box implementation for your language, so you can run it on GraalVM. And it's quite interesting. Yeah,
they've already written the Ruby, the Python, the JavaScript, the R language packs or whatever they're called to run those languages on truffle or through truffle or however that works.
Yeah, that's correct. And I was actually thinking about this interesting example today. So I think some time ago, like 6 months ago or so, we saw somebody posting on Twitter that as a part of their studies, I think like master thesis or something, this guy implemented PHP on his own on GraalVM, user truffle, right? So, and it was quite fascinating to me, right? Because it was like one person, right? A student just casually doing this along with his studies, right? And he implemented PHP on GraalVM.
Wow.
And it's not necessarily like the most complete or production ready implementation, perhaps, but just kind of to give you an idea that it took like one person without previous backgrounds, probably in virtual machines and compilers, to implement the language on GraalVM, which is pretty fascinating, I think.
Yeah. So if we roll back in time a little while, there was Jython and JRuby were two of the big kind of alternative languages from the existing language community that were built on top of the JVM. And there was a lot of work that had to go into how you take Python and make it run on the JVM.
That's why
and Ruby
Jython never got updated.
Right. Yeah, it was just too painful.
Yeah.
And so truffle is really an alternative to that. And now you can write Python that runs on the JVM and allegedly would perform a lot better.
So do they have like Python 3.10 translated yet?
You mean in Jython, or you mean our like GraalVM Python?
Using truffle.
So I do not remember the exact version. I'm gonna have to check for
But
that.
anyway, it's a fairly recent version.
I do remember that transition to 3, right? I just don't recall the exact version, so I cannot promise. Yeah, but it is quite different from Jython, and also like our Ruby implementation is quite different from JRuby, right? So they are written from scratch and they're using Truffle, and in terms of performance, they show very good results. Yeah, so if somebody has been using, Jython or JRuby, it's worth to give our implementations a try as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. Is anybody using JRuby or Jython should probably be going in the GraalVM direction.
Oh, well, yeah, because I think Jython got stopped at 2.6, which was,
ouch. Yeah.
It's been many years since it's been updated because it was just too much trouble.
Yeah. So there's this universal VM through Truffle with lots of different language bindings, and I think that's super exciting. Like, why keep on reinventing the wheel of all the great things that a VM is doing for you? And then there's a key part of this, which is the function for foreign function interface stuff, or I don't remember what it's called in the GraalVM world, but some way to call native code or link binaries. Like what's that look like in GraalVM? Because that becomes important when you start, integrating libraries that are going to call native libraries or something.
Yeah, I'm not a compiler engineer myself, or do not implement languages myself, so I cannot talk about that much. Yeah, unfortunately. I know that we have a way, for example, to execute native extensions, because we also have, probably I should have mentioned before, we have like an LLVM runtime in GraalVM as well, right? It's called Solong. So we also have the way to execute those native extensions as well.
Oh, but does LLVM run on do you take the LLVM bytecode and run it on Truffle? Is that how that works? Or?
So we do run it on GraalVM, and I think, it does include the Truffle level as well. Yeah. But unfortunately, I can't go into more detail on that.
I remember reading, I haven't ever done it, but it was one of the important points of Truffle was being able to have a better foreign function interface, and I don't remember all the details.
So it probably not only has its own bytecodes, but it has some way to use LLVM to compile pieces of it down to...
So it can execute bitcodes, right? So that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing the Truffle bytecode or intermediate form or whatever it is not the same as JVM bytecodes. I'm guessing they invented something else, because otherwise it would have been just as hard to implement Python.
Yeah. As Jython, yeah.
I mean, there is one more concept related to Truffle, right? And that is abstract syntax trees, right? So the way, as I understand, right, the way Truffle executes your program is that those interpreters are looking at abstract syntax trees of your program and execute those.
So it's at a higher level, and that's why it's easier. Well, I mean, your system already puts out an abstract syntax tree.
Right, yeah.
So it hooks into it at that point, rather than you having to
go to bytecode.
You go to bytecode, which is a lot. Okay, that.
Yeah, because LLVM is like a universal bytecode, so so they don't necessarily need to go to that universal bytecode.
No.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, what's important is the abstract syntax tree.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we were talking about with Runar.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, is getting down to the AST and then being able to.
So it turns out that UML wasn't the universal description language; it's the AST that's the universal description.
But now we need a universal AST description language.
Oh, yeah. Well, maybe that's what this is.
Yeah, maybe that's what this is.
Okay.
Yeah. So we've got Truffle and GraalVM, and GraalVM itself is or has something other than hotspot. Is that right? Or something like a different VM, or I don't know. Tell me how that works.
So for Java, right, when you execute Java in JIT, we use hotspot as a platform, right? That is, if you're using GraalVM to execute Java in JIT mode. Now, in native image, there is a different VM, right? This is called Substrate VM, and it's a tiny VM implementation that we put into that final executable that you've built, so it can take care of those kind of typical VM tasks for you. But in JIT mode, it's just the same hotspot VM.
So it's the same hotspot VM, but there's something magical in there, because I've seen people do benchmarks or even production rollouts where they switch from using the
Mm-hmm.
standard JDK. All that they switch is over to the GraalVM JDK,
Yeah.
and all of a sudden their performance is significantly better.
I'm glad you said that because just today I reposted like somebody from community reporting
I
how
think I
they
saw that this
transitioned.
morning.
Okay. So this is where this is coming from. Yeah. So what they did, right? I think they've been using OpenJDK, if I remember that tweet correctly, right? And they
Yeah.
transitioned to GraalVM and they saw immediate improvements to latency, right? So there is something, as you're saying, magical indeed, right? And that is the compiler, right? So when you transition to GraalVM, there is a whole new compiler. So instead of C2, you are getting our own Graal compiler, right? And it's completely new, written from scratch. So that is where this difference is coming from, right? There are some kind of brand new optimizations in it. So for some workloads, you will see quite a bit of difference when you transition to GraalVM. Like for
So it's
example,
not
I
on
mean,
the JVM side. It's actually
so
on the compile side,
it's
or like
it's
it's
the
producing
compiler,
better
right?
bytecode.
Because compiler is responsible for optimizing your code, right? Producing better machine code, right? So it's basically where those performance differences are coming from, especially if you're looking at things like peak throughput, for example. So I'm sure you saw this talk at conferences, right? Where people from Twitter would talk about how they transitioned to GraalVM as well, right? And
Oh, I
how they
haven't seen that
saw
one.
quite significant, like I don't know, 30% of something improvements in terms of performance, right? And they are using, I believe, Scala in there.
Yeah,
But for
it's called
them,
a
yeah,
Scala.
switching to GraalVM, just
Huh.
for the compiler part, they saw very significant improvements in there.
So
Yeah.
if I just switch my runtime JVM over to GraalVM, I may not see significant improvements. Although I think there is even a better garbage collector by default in GraalVM's
So in for
VM, or
Java in Jet, we just kind of offer you the default that is in your hotspot VM, right? So things like G1, for example, we do not ship our own GC, right? So
okay.
where this performance is coming from is actually the compiler. So in
Okay.
terms of whether or
You
not
got
you
to
will
compile your application with GraalVM to see any of these
you
performance.
gotta
Yeah.
kind of use GraalVM as a top tier compiler, right, instead of C2. So
Okay.
in terms of like whether or not you would see performance improvements, I don't think there is like one answer, right, because every workload is different, right? So typically what we recommend, like give it a try, right, run some part of your application GraalVM and see if it can give you performance benefits, because really there is no one answer that could satisfy all the workload and all the environment and all this kind of requirements of each application. So just kind of give it a try, right? It's a fairly simple transition, as you saw also today in that tweet, right?
Yeah,
So you might just get performance benefits out of this transition.
that's
So
cool.
this project is really kind of just saying, oh, well, how about if we just completely start from scratch in
The whole
the
thing.
whole system from top to bottom and take advantage of not having to drag old code with us?
I
Is that
mean, not sure about all system, right? Because, for example, we do have still Hotspot VM as a platform, right? So the things that we
okay?
implemented are, the compiler, right? If we are talking about Java Jet, now native image is something rather new, right? And Truffle as framework. But yeah, not sure that qualifies if as re-implementing everything from scratch.
Mm.
But a lot.
Something was rewritten in Java though that used to be like C or C++, wasn't it? Isn't there some piece of GraalVM that used to be in the traditional JDK?
So the compiler itself, right? So I cannot kind of say for sure, but I guess it is written in things like C and C++ in Hotspot. Though again, don't quote me on this. But GraalVM was quite interesting. Was itself written in Java, right? So we wrote our own compiler in Java.
That's cool. That's
Hmm.
probably more maintainable, I guess.
Hmm. Hmm.
um, okay, so we've got. It's amazing how vast GraalVM is. There's just an umbrella with a whole bunch of things underneath it. And so, back to Bruce's question of what problem is it solving? It's solving a lot of problems, and there's a lot of different ways
Yeah,
to use it.
exactly. Because there are so many things. And I remember when we first started to kind of talking about GraalVM publicly and about all the features and components, it was quite fascinating to see how people are using it, right? Because there were some kind of intended use cases that we saw coming. But also because there are so many components and you can kind of mix and match them, it was quite fascinating to see how people discover, new and new ways of using it because there are, so many things in it.
Yeah.
Well, and didn't you say one of the issues was the startup time?
So that's native image, and we could switch gears to talking about native
Mm-hmm.
image specifically. So give us the rundown on native image and what it does and the magic.
Yeah. Yeah. So the magic behind native image, right? So normally the way you would execute your Java program is that it will be dynamically executed on the JVM, right? And it means that you need to have an actual JVM to run your Java program. Now, it is a bit different with native image, right? Because what it does, it would ahead of time kind of analyze and compile your application. So it will look for all the reachable code and only include all the code that is necessary for your program's execution into this final binary. So it will look at your application code and the JDK classes it uses and the libraries, and it will only pack the things that are actually needed in your application, like for your application to execute, and it will compile them into this platform specific standalone binary, and you don't no longer need a JVM to run it, right? So you can just execute it as is. And that's pretty fascinating, right? Because what you mentioned is startup times, it improves them significantly, right? Because everything is pre-compiled, everything is pre-optimized. And one more thing that we are doing when we are building native image, we also perform heap snapshotting. So you can also start with pre-populated heap. And this way your application starts really fast and there is no this like warm-up curve, right? So it's ready from get-go. And this is basically, as you're saying, the magic that native image does.
Yeah, and there's a few use cases for this that I think are really interesting and people are beginning to use more. One
Mm-hmm.
is serverless. That's in my world where
Absolutely.
I've been
Yeah.
building my serverless applications that with auto scaling, they need to be able to start up instantly. And it is just ridiculously amazing how quick these things start. So in some of the applications that I've created, I've got a container, a Docker container that doesn't even have an operating system in it because I've used static linking in GraalVM native image. So there's no operating system, just a single file that is the ahead of time compiled JVM application that no longer uses the JVM. And I have, in some cases, even compressed these binaries using a
Yeah.
tool called UPX.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
my whole container image is like 10 megs for the whole thing to run. It's just and it
But it's
starts up
still going
instantly.
through Docker
I wrap that binary in Docker so
because
that it's
that's what.
that gives you the portability
Okay, but
across
it
the
doesn't have
environments.
all of the extra like operating system baggage
It
that.
doesn't need it. So Docker containers can
So Docker is simply like a facade over your thing, so it plugs
it's
in.
just a way to tar gz your
Okay.
binary file and
Mm-hmm.
then Docker conveys the platform stuff to the virtualization engine or something
Mm-hmm.
so
Okay.
that it knows, okay, this is a AMD 64 Linux binary,
Sure.
and so then I'm guessing that knows how to virtually run
Right.
that
It
thing.
plugs
Yeah,
everything in the right place. But
yeah.
with that, because I always thought Docker was the virtual operating system, and you're telling me it's possible to leave that out.
Yeah, it's a little weird because most of the time Docker containers contain an operating system in
Mm-hmm.
them,
Yeah.
and but it's not necessary.
That's the part I
You
didn't
can
know.
just toss a static binary into a Docker container, and as long as you've, I don't know, statically linked it in the right way
Mm-hmm.
or something, which GraalVM native image can
Yeah.
do, it just works and it's amazing.
Hmm.
People have been doing this with Go for a little while, creating containers without any operating system,
Hmm.
but now you can do it with GraalVM native image too.
Hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's pretty darn cool. So okay, so serverless is one of the big areas.
True.
I think CLIs are becoming a bigger place for this too,
Yeah, I wanted to
because
say about that as well, right? Because in CLIs, you kind of also want this thing to kind of start fast, do something fast, right? And kind of be done with it, right? So CLIs are also very good for a very good use case for native image. Yeah.
and you can make them small binaries. Like I said, like
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah.
servers that I've built are like 10 meg binaries. That's that's an acceptable CLI size. Where one of the challenges with Java CLIs before was, oh, you need to go download this 100+ meg JVM and then download all these jar files, and it was just like way too much for, and then of course it wouldn't start up instantly. So that was the other downside.
Yeah. And you mentioned serverless, right? But it's also microservices, right? So if you want your microservices start fast, and also like in addition to startup, right, there is a bunch of other things, like for example, memory efficiency, right? So it doesn't need that much memory again because it doesn't have all that infrastructure, right? So it doesn't need to load classes, doesn't need to compile things, right? So it's also very memory efficient. So that's another area where we see quite a bit of adoption for native image, both in terms of users and actually frameworks that kind of integrate with native image and use native image as a platform.
Yeah, yeah, and so with native image, there's no longer like class files and the JVM like
And
interpreting
all
the
the
bytecodes.
dependencies.
Yeah, I mean it just is. Alina, you tell us more about it, but it is just taking that whole thing of jar files because you
Yeah.
start with jar files and turn it into a magic uh, static executable.
Yeah, so it does have to be like everything has to be known at build time, right? Because in the end, it's just machine code, right? So in the end, it's just a binary. So it no longer like loads classes, right? No longer optimizes code, right? In the end, it's just a binary file. That's why it's so efficient.
What if you have dynamic code? What does it do with that?
Yeah, so there like everything has to be known at build time, right? And one, I guess, if you want to start using native image, I think one of the easiest way for you to go would be to go through one of those frameworks that already kind of integrate with it, because they would do some of that kind of configuration and heavy lifting for you, right? So if you wanted to kind of try native image, let's say tomorrow, I do recommend checking out one of those frameworks that work with
So to be
native
like
image. I think
Quarkus
that
or
would be
Spring Boot
yeah, Spring
or
Boot,
Micronaut.
Micronaut, Halidon, you name it, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's just like the easiest way to get started with native image and get like a lot of things out of the box and just get you started fast.
So what those frameworks have done is they've added tooling that will understand the dynamic code paths essentially, and then GraalVM native image needs to know about those dynamic places, reflection or whatever. And
Yeah.
so these frameworks have made it automatic to get that information and pass it off to GraalVM native image. And GraalVM native image just needs to know where things go dynamic so that it can follow those code paths so that it can ahead of time compile all the necessary code paths. Um, it's definitely been one of the challenging parts about doing native image if you're not using one of those frameworks, which I've done with Scala, which we did for our book. Was we didn't have the support of those frameworks to
Mm-hmm.
do that, and it turns out Scala lazy vowels use sun, miss, unsafe underneath the covers for some reason, and so that becomes a dynamic part, or the way that they call it becomes dynamic, and so you have to come up with the declaration to native image about the lazy vowel parts of Scala. So that was one of the challenges, and luckily GraalVM native image makes it easy to create this configuration. And this is what I actually did for our Booker one that we did this on, was you can run the application on the JVM with a Java agent,
Yeah.
and the Java agent will keep track of all the dynamic calls and then produce the configuration that GraalVM needs from it. And so you just run your application with the agent, and then you get your configuration, and then you use that configuration with native image.
Yeah, exactly. That's another way to go, right? With this tracing agent, but still I think like it's somewhat easier to do with one of the frameworks
Oh,
if
for sure.
if that's an option. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So why wouldn't I, for example, use Kotlin native instead of Graal binary?
So the nice, wonderful thing about GraalVM native image stuff is that you are just doing a JVM based application. You still have access to the whole JVM ecosystem, whereas with Kotlin native and Scala native, you lose the JVM ecosystem, you lose the JVM libraries,
Okay.
and you lose. One of the things that I really like about native image is that when I'm doing local development, I'm still running on the JVM.
Mm-hmm.
I do everything on the JVM because I don't want to wait for the ahead of time
Mm-hmm.
compilation
Right.
as part of my local development process. So it's still a JVM based application that then you run through the native image tool to create your actual ahead of time
But
compiled.
any existing third-party libraries in the JVM, you still have access to those.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there has been quite a bit of work happening in the native image component lately. Like, for example, in the latest release, there were so many changes, and I saw the community was very happy about them. Like, for example, there has been this request from community to kind of keep working on the image build process, right? Because sometimes it can take a while, right? Especially depending on how big your project is, right? And this is something we've been doing since 21.0, right? And now in 21.3, we added even more changes to that. So now those builds are faster. They are using less memory. So we are trying to make this process faster, but also more like developer friendly. And one more interesting initiative we have in this component is that we are also working on that output that you see when you're building native image, right? Also trying to make it, more informative for you, show more information, maybe in more readable way, right? To give you more information about like what is happening, what are the main classes that end up in your image. So like really trying to work on that developer experience part of the native image component.
Yeah, so because it takes a while to run native image on a JVM application, I just do that in my CI/CD pipeline. I don't ever do that like as part of any local development or anything. And just as CI/CD, I run native image, and so it's okay if it takes 10 minutes. I don't know if any of mine actually take 10 minutes, 5 minutes, but it's okay if it
Okay.
takes 5 minutes because this is just a step to production in the pipeline, in the delivery pipeline. Um, Quarkus and Spring Boot and maybe Micronaut also have a way to create your native image as part of your CI process, but then actually run your tests against the native image produced binary so that you make sure that what you validated in the JVM
Mm-hmm.
land is going to be able to be validated in native image land. And that's a really cool part of ensuring that this thing that is running in a different environment than your developers use to build it in is still going to work.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think it's super exciting stuff, and I haven't done any of the like Truffle VM or Truffle multi-language parts of this yet, and it's something that we should explore with Python, and try to take some of your Python stuff and
Yeah,
see
but
how
you
that
should
goes.
definitely give it a try, right? Because I can see how native image is very exciting, right? And we see a lot of, traction and questions about it. But also, I'm a big believer in this polyglot aspect of GraalVM as well, right? It might be the first impression that, okay, maybe it's a bit too exotic. Like, why would I need manual languages in my own application, right? I can just stick to one and use whatever like tools and libraries I have. And sometimes people say, okay, like, but does anyone even like need that polyglot capability? It's just too complex. And I kind of like that question because I do see a lot of those polyglot use cases in the community. Like, for example, there is this one organization who have like Java developers, right, who are doing application development, and they also have a data science team. And those data science people would much rather work with R, right, because that's their primary language and it has all the packages that they want, right? So what they did instead, they kind of adopted GraalVM, and this way they can kind of compromise in the middle here, right? So those application developers can keep working in Java because they know it and they like it and they are productive with it. And these data science engineers can work with R, right? And they can all kind of use the best tool for the job and just kind of meet in between here because GraalVM gives them a platform for that.
So, what does it look like when the Java programmers want to call into R? I
Yeah, it
assume
is.
that's
It is
possible,
possible to exchange values between the
This is
languages.
the
Yes.
FFI, the
right?
foreign
Foreign
function.
function
Yeah,
interface.
and
Yeah.
so they have something for this, and
Okay.
I haven't played with it
So
at
we
But
have we
all.
have
across languages.
Truffle API, right? That's one of the things I believe, right? So it's definitely possible to exchange values between languages, right? Because I guess otherwise it will be just not so valuable, right? But you can't pass values back and forth if you're running on GraalVM.
Yeah, because this was, I mean, way back when I was on the C++ committee, that's when Corba got started.
Mm,
And Corba was going to do that. It was going to be like, oh, yeah, all languages will be able to call each other. And it got stalled. So this
yeah.
has been something we've been chasing for a long time. Don't fight about languages, just call them.
Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
I wonder if Scala and Kotlin and Clojure were starting today, if they would have built on Truffle instead of doing their own bytecode.
You mean like the way a lot of things, oh, like Julia is built on LLVM.
Right.
And I think a lot of other languages do that now too. It's like, well, why would you write your own, you would just use LLVM because
Yeah.
that's out there and everybody's supporting it. And
Yeah.
yeah,
We'll have to ask
and it's optimal.
the rock guy why he didn't build rock on truffle.
Oh, right.
That'd be interesting to.
Because he I think used LLVM, right?
Did he?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I think it's a pretty safe choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
What is the? But I mean, you're in like production, and people are using GraalVM for
Sure.
production work
Yeah.
now, right? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a
So
good.
Yeah, but like talking about production, like we were talking about native image, right? And I think there is one very interesting story about using native image in production. So, for example, Alibaba is doing this, right? And that was quite interesting to find out, right? Because at their scale, right, it's even more fascinating to be using native image, right? Because they have huge lots. And in the story that they told us, they said that they have been like they moved to native image, and shortly after that they had like this huge sales festival where they had very kind of high load on their system, right? So they actually battle tested like native image basically like the next day, right, under this huge loads, and
Wow.
they were very excited about the results, right? And I believe they're still using native image right now and also contributing to the project. So for
Wow.
them it was a very good decision to transition to it.
Now it's not all roses and unicorns and rainbows or whatever in native image. So one of the trade-offs you make with native image is you get that lower memory usage and faster startup time, but some of the like long running process benefits that you get where from the JVM where the JIT has like really optimized stuff based on actual execution, you lose some of those
because it all has to be done at compile time.
that's right. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it can't optimize things like the JIT does, which is
It can't.
optimizing things at
Well,
runtime.
that's dynamic optimization, and
I mean,
you
Yeah.
not
can't do that.
exactly, right? Because we no longer have that profiling information available, right? That JVM has. But again, there are things that can be done about it, right? Like, for example, there is this thing called profile guide optimizations, right? So if you would collect profiles in advance and give it to us
Ah,
at the build time, we could kind of consider those and build and optimize the binary with those profiles in mind, right?
yeah,
So
that's
still
true.
there are kind of workarounds for it as well.
Yeah. Huh. That's cool. So and then one of the other challenges I was thinking about was you can't do like a JVM agent, right, in a native image compiled binary. Like it doesn't have the same agent ability that the JVM
So
does or
some agents would work, I believe, right? But
okay.
that will be like you would have to check each one and see, like probably just kind of give it a try and see whether that works out.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, overall, I think why not go to native image for like most use cases? It's been a pretty sure bet for the people that have gone there. So um,
So I wonder if it's one of the problems that Python has had forever is the packaging and delivery problem, and so many people have tried to solve this in one way or another, and so this seems like this could be a
hmm,
solution to that. So I mean, basically you want to hand the customer an executable that
Mm-hmm.
they don't have to know anything about to understand. They don't know anything about it, they just want to run it.
yeah,
And that has been a problem forever in Python.
yeah. It's can I take a truffle application and native imagify it? Because I've only
I
ever
was
done it
I was
on.
exactly like I was thinking about it as you were like talking about it, right? So because that's exactly what I had in mind as well. So what you can do with native image, one more thing is that if your host application is a Java application, right? So not Python but Java, and then you call some Python from it, you can compile that to a native image. One thing to keep in mind though is we wouldn't compile Python or JavaScript or whatever ahead of time. We would dynamically execute it in runtime. So you will have your image in the end, right? But those languages will still be dynamically executed. But it's
Sure.
possible to do, yeah.
Yeah, but as a packaging scheme, so you're saying that
Absolutely.
you would still have to have some Java
Runtime.
running. In other
Some
words, in
some
in order,
runtime for JavaScript or for Python or whatever to make it happen. Yeah.
but I mean, you'd have to have a piece of Java code running in order to be able to call say the Python and
No,
package this whole thing?
I think you could just do truffle
Okay, you can
directly.
just do truffle
Yeah.
standalone.
So
Yeah.
your Java would be
I
ahead of time
misunderstood that.
compiled, and then there will be like runtime for those dynamic languages, and they will be
Sure.
dynamically executed. Yeah.
Right.
We should definitely try this with
Oh
Python.
yeah.
You should
No,
give it
that
a
was
try,
good.
and then tell me how it worked out.
Yeah.
I will be curious as
because
well.
that's just being able to deliver an executable without having to worry about all of those things has been something that the Python community has been fighting with for most of its life, basically. And people keep trying to solve it.
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting.
Well, that's super helpful information on GraalVM. I appreciate that. Let's switch gears and talk about developer relations and building developer communities, since that's something that you've been doing for many years.
Let's go ahead. Yeah, I'm very, very passionate about it.
Yeah. What are you passionate about that?
I mean, one thing is communities, right? And I recently had that conversation with a friend. So he also is in DevRel, right? And we were talking about like why we are even doing this, right? And what's in this for us, right? And I said, okay, but I'm a community person, right? This is something very, very natural for me, and I cannot really explain why or what like it gives me, right? But I just feel like being a part of community is the right thing. And this friend told me that it actually sounds very kind of reasonable and naturally, right? Because we all as human beings, I guess, want to belong somewhere, right? To be a part of something. So it's not a surprise that communities is like one of those groups or tribes that we want to belong to, right? So for me, this is something like very natural. And I remember my times being a community organizer. It was like so much fun. I mean, my team and the community itself, it was a lot of fun.
Huh. That's cool. Bringing developers together into a community and building that community, and it's rewarding work. I think it feels good to be part of a community and to grow that community.
It took me a long time in organizing my own small conferences to realize, because I always thought, oh, this is about sharing technology, which it was, but that wasn't the real reason. The real reason that people would come to these events is because of connection, just that connection. And we happen to use the language of technology. Like, oh, you know about this thing, or I don't know about this thing. We can talk about it. But what's really happening is the underlying connections.
That we want to connect as humans.
Yes.
Yeah, that was my observation as well. And actually, like one of my favorite things about community was that like we would organize, meetups and conferences, and sometimes they were on very different topics. And still there were people who would show up to every single thing, basically no matter what the topic was. And they said, like, we are just showing up because we like your community and we like the atmosphere here. And we just kind of like hanging out with you and talking and learning about whatever, just because we like this community, right? So yeah, that was actually the best part, right? When people just show up for a community and they, they are open to learn something new because the main value is just connecting with that community. That was amazing.
How do you build community?
Oh, it's such a complicated question. I don't even know. Like, there are so many ways to do it. I guess there should be some central piece connecting you all together, right? So could be a technology, could be something you are all trying to accomplish as a community, could be, I don't even know, but there should be something,
some shared values in some way.
Yeah. And I think another thing that is important there and that people actually feel is when there is like, this core organizing team or whatever, but some people who are passionate about it and have this kind of genuine motivation to do it, right? So they're not doing this for money. They're not doing this because this is their job, right? But just because they believe in it. So I think this kind of attitude, right? And this passion, people always kind of notice it, right? So, and this is something that attracts them, right? When they see that somebody is doing something because they believe in it, right? Not because they are forced to do it or because they promise they will do it or whatever, right? So I believe you can always tell when you see those great communities, right, that are built by people who actually believe in communities and for whom this is like a real thing and they would do it, no matter what. Like this could like necessarily, that is not necessarily their job, right? They did not necessarily commit to it, but they just like doing it. And this is actually something that draws people, right? When they see that it's like a real thing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Mm.
the shared passion is it spreads, right? And I guess that's something that helps a community grow is by allowing people to bring their passion to something, to a group,
Right.
and yeah, people's passion for something spreads, I think, and that helps
Yeah.
grow a community.
And I think it's also very nice when communities are kind of open and welcoming to new members, right? So everyone, like sometimes I think it could be kind of scary to join a new community, right? Because you know that there are all those people who have been there for years and now you show up and maybe like, I don't know what are the rules or whatever, or what is the culture in that community, right? And I think that's very important, but also challenging to make sure that your community is welcoming to new members and it's easy for them to join and they will feel like welcomed in that place. So I think that's another uh, thing about being a
Mm.
great community.
The Python world has done a really good job of this because they
Really.
have all kinds of, groups that if you're not if you don't feel like you're ready for one,
Mm-hmm.
there's others where you go, oh, I'll bet if I went there, I would be
Mm-hmm.
welcoming.
Hmm.
Yeah, I'd
Yeah,
be welcomed. Sure.
Hmm.
true.
Uh, how do you create safety? I think this is kind of related to the welcoming thing, but how do you create safety in communities for people?
I think there are so many ways. Like, I think like, for one thing, many communities have code of conduct, right? So this is kind of more of a written, formalized thing, right? But it gives you, like, the thing that we were saying, right? Sometimes there are those unspoken rules, but how am I supposed to know them, right? When I just join or I'm considering joining, right? But I don't know what that community is like, right? So I think that is one of the things that helps with that. Also, I think like it's maybe more related to a workplace, but I think could apply to communities as well. So once I read the statement that teams or workplaces culture is defined by the worst behavior that is tolerated, right? So every single time, everyone in the community or the leaders kind of do not react upon something that can be dangerous to the community, that's a bad sign, right? Because it kind of gives other a signal that it is acceptable here, right? So, and I think that is when people can feel less safe or can wonder about, like, okay, what is the culture here? Because things like that should not be happening, right? So that's a very tricky part, and even more tricky because communities are less formal, right? And technically there is maybe less of leverage and less of ways to handle those things. But I think this is also important, right? So making sure things like that don't happen and everyone in the community feels safe and welcome.
Hmm. That's a probably a really good important point on communities is that if bad behavior goes undealt with, then
Yeah.
that is giving you a picture of the culture that is acceptable in a way, or um, and
Yeah,
so
because I believe like team culture or community culture, it's not set in stone, right? It's a very flexible thing, right? And it changes every time you observe that something changes, right? So something changes one, two, three times, and that's like new normal, right? So now your team or your community has like this new culture thing. So it's constantly changing, and I think people are very good at picking up those signs, right? And observing what is like this community, what community is like at this point of time, right? So it
yeah,
constantly changes.
yeah.
Hmm. Is there something at the other end, though? I mean, it's like you say, well, the worst thing that you tolerate is the culture. What about on the other end?
The best thing.
The best thing that can happen,
Yeah, the best
Yeah.
thing that could happen would also be a
you know,
important picture into the
mm-hmm,
culture.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, because maybe you could culturally um, create an environment where creativity is not allowed or
Well,
something.
by trying to control the worst thing that could happen, you also may limit the best thing that can happen.
Yeah, Yeah.
Yeah, but talking about best things, I think what should happen there is all good things should be recognized, right? And by recognizing that, you are kind of sending a signal to the whole group, right? Like, this is what is happening. You are sending this positive signal to the person who did this, like, great job, great project, whatever.
Mm.
So you're recognizing them, right? But also sharing with others. So I think, like, giving credit and recognizing great contributions is also, like, probably what you were saying, right? Like, what do we do about the best positive,
Yeah.
contributions and actions?
One of the coolest things I saw in the Scala community over the last few years was there was, I forget the name of it, but it was like a day of gratitude. And so
Mm-hmm.
everyone in the Scala community was just sharing what they were grateful for in the Scala community. And I was like, what a cool thing to value. And why don't we do that
Sounds
more often?
amazing. Sounds
Yeah.
amazing, really. Yeah.
And it made me have a lot of respect for people in the community because they were they placed value on gratitude, and
Mm-hmm.
that was really cool.
That's actually a great initiative, right? Because I think quite often good things go unnoticed, right? It's just our part of perception of what is normal and what is okay. And almost maybe sometimes people would be just kind of shy, right? To say, okay, you did this great thing. I'm so grateful for this because it completely changed the way I do things, right? So maybe, having this nudge, right? Having this particular day or platform to give this gratitude, it's really a great idea. And I'm
Yeah.
sure it had a huge positive impact on the community.
Well, especially because of the built-in negativity bias that humans have. We
Right.
pay more attention to the negative
Mm.
things because, well, they might eat us. So it makes sense in the past, but that's built in. We got that wired in, and so to actually pay attention to say, let's focus on paying attention to the positive things
Yeah.
makes a big
Put
difference.
energy into
Yeah.
those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right.
What was your quote on what culture is? It's
Oh,
everything.
culture is everything we punish and reward,
Yeah.
which is
Interesting.
like, I mean, it's the most succinct one that I've ever heard,
Yeah.
and I mean, at least gives you the direction of what it's like. Okay, well, we promote these things and we try to, um, not do these other things.
Well, it'd be a good, useful tool where people in a community should maybe periodically evaluate what have we punished and what have we rewarded, and that will give them a picture of what their culture actually is, and then they can decide if they need to make changes and
And how much
reward or
Mm-hmm.
time do
punish
we
different
want
things.
to spend on punishment versus maybe focus a little more on rewards and a little less time on trying to punish.
Yeah, yeah. Well, cool. Well, I'm sure that the communities you've been a part of are very grateful for your contributions to them, and yeah.
Yeah, I should hope so, right? But also, I think being a community organizer, it's also like a challenge to some point, right? Because I don't know what's your experience like, but me and my community, it was that we had like our daytime jobs, right? And we were community organizers in our free time,
Mm,
and at some point, it became a bit too much, right? So probably we did not kind of handle all that well, right? Probably there are
mm,
people who can handle it better, but at some point we realized that we cannot, have our daytime jobs, be community organizers, and be crazy perfectionists as we were, right? And kind of
yeah,
make it a sustainable thing, right? So after years, it just no longer worked out for us, which is a bit sad. And also, this is something I sometimes see happening to other communities, unfortunately, right? People just burn out, right? Because they're
yeah.
so committed to their communities that at some point they just
Takes a
cannot
lot of
proceed with that
energy to
anymore.
organize
Yeah.
It
communities.
can. Well, and I mean, like we burn out poor Dick Wall
Yeah,
by, I mean, well, he burned himself out too because he was such a perfectionist.
yeah.
But eventually at some point he was totally exhausted
Just
from
didn't have the
doing
energy
the
to.
Java posse,
Yeah.
and
Well, and same thing in the Scala community. Just
yeah,
got burnout on
right, and
community organization there.
so,
How
but
do we
it's
not burn out our community leaders?
well, yeah. I mean, I'd like to train them in the open spaces way of holding events where it's like
Yeah,
you go, okay, here's the deal, you guys do it,
yeah,
and then it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't exhaust the organizer.
yeah,
Yeah, in
True.
fact, it becomes relatively easy and delightful.
yeah.
But talking
Yeah.
about events, I've been meaning to ask. So James, I believe you just returned from Devox UK, right?
Yes.
So, which was
Yeah.
like in-person event, which is big these
Yeah.
days. So how was it?
It was wonderful to be back together in person with nerds, and it was so
But
delightful.
everybody had to show proof of vaccination,
Yep.
you said, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So it felt safe. As far as I
Yeah.
know, there was no COVID cases or anything, and so it was delightful to be back in person with people.
Was
I
it your first conference since COVID
It was my
started, like in
second, actually. I
person?
did
Okay.
UberConf in Denver a
Okay.
couple weeks ago, and so yeah, it's so wonderful to be in person with the people I care about.
I miss that so much. I'm kind of
Yeah,
hoping that maybe like next season, right? Maybe spring, right? It will be, somewhat back to normal and we will be able to go to conferences again and talk to people again because, yeah, I do miss that a lot as well.
yeah. Um, Maybe, yeah. Hopefully, I get to see you in person soon. Um, Maybe to end, it would be great to hear about your experience as a woman in technology. What's that
Mhm.
been like?
Yeah, for me, it was rather a smooth journey, I would say, right? So I don't think I ever had any big, challenges or blocks on my road or things like that, or people, rejecting me for jobs and stuff just because I'm a female, right? So for me, it was rather smooth, right? But
It's
also,
good to
I
hear
know
that that experience is possible. It's not always a bumpy road.
but also I guess it also depends maybe on like where do you work or what culture you come from. Like for example, in like I live in Ukraine and I work most of my life in Ukraine, right? So I guess here also to some extent you kind of grow thicker skin, and I guess some things just kind of go unnoticed for you, right? Because just the culture around you is like that, right? But also, I don't think I ever had like major issues in my career, but I do know quite a few women that do, and that's why I strongly believe in those diversity and inclusion programs that luckily many communities and companies and organizations have at this point, right? I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in diversity. And also, I believe that you cannot be what you cannot see, right? For example, I remember like when I was in school, unfortunately, there was no such thing as there are right now when people just would kind of show up to us and talk about their professions and explain what it's like, right? And maybe if it was a thing back then, and also if there were maybe more women kind of showing up and talking about their jobs in technology back then, maybe I would have made different choices. I'm pretty sure that I would, right?
Mm,
But that's why I'm saying that like you cannot be what you cannot see, right? Because without role models, it's really hard to do something, right? It just may seem impossible to you, right? If you've never seen somebody accomplishing like that in front of you, right? So I
yeah,
do believe that those programs are very necessary, and I'm so happy that many communities and companies have them those days.
yeah. That's cool. That's, yeah, inspirational for my 6-year-old daughter. I definitely want her to have women in technology role models that, it just is normal, and there's a lot of women that she can look up to in that world, or in, many other worlds too. It doesn't have to just be technology, but
Yeah, but
yeah,
just kind of, give her all the options, right? And kind of make sure that she sees all those options, right? It's not necessarily that she chooses technology, but that just she grows up with all those choices in mind and she knows that she can make any and be successful in it. And there will be a place for her in it if she wants to do so, right?
yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, just yeah, making it an available option, whereas it
Yeah, I
didn't
mean,
always seem
even
that way.
in my own experience, I look back and I go, "Wow, I didn't know I had those choices," and I'm not even sure how I would have known.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah,
yeah, you just didn't know that those were available.
yeah. I mean, I'm sure if you're a 6-year-old girl and all you ever
Yeah.
see is men in technology, then subconsciously that says that in some ways women aren't allowed in technology,
Yeah,
and
but in
spoken
general,
ways.
even it's kind of as you're saying, right? So see all those options, right? Like I remember when I was 16 finishing school, right? I did not even realize that, how many awesome jobs are out there, right? Because no one ever talked to me about them, right? So maybe things like, I don't know, developer relations wasn't really a thing back then, right? But, just kind of, I think we can do more as a society to educate, school kids about all the possible options and maybe help them choose a bit better, right? So that they don't have to, you know, just kind of drop 5 6 years of education and go into some different field because they realize that it's not what really inspires them, right? So I think there is still like a long way to go in that regard.
Yeah.
It's true.
Well, thank you for being part of that and showing that there is a way for a better way or an alternative way, that there are options for
Hopefully.
for the
Yeah.
girls that are coming into this world. And yeah, and thank you for the community leadership that you've done and all you've given to the technology world. But
Thank you so much
and
for giving me a chance to talk about it.
yeah, no, we really appreciate it. All right. Well, thank you, Alina.
Thanks.